Dive In.
Bienvenidos a Dive In.
Witajcie na festiwalu Dive In.
Welcome to the Dive In Festival.
Willkommen zu Dive In.
Bienvenidos a Dive In.
Welcome to Dive In.
Mabuhay sa Dive In Kapistahan.
Üdvözlünk a Dive In Fesztiválon.
Добро пожаловать на фестиваль Dive In.
ברוכים הבאים. בואו לצלול איתנו.
ডাইভ ইন উৎসবে আপনাদের সকলকে জানাই সাদর আমন্ত্রণ।
Dive In'e yokoso.
Benvenuti al Dive In Festival.
Dive In Festivali'ne hoş geldiniz.
Ahlan bikum fi Dive In.
Great. Well, good afternoon to you, everyone, or good morning, good evening if you are located in a different time zone. Welcome to the session which is called Leadership, Advancing Diversity and Inclusion During the Pandemic. And today session is organized in partnership with PwC UK, THB, and Willis Towers Watson. So I would like to give you a small intro to our moderator, and the chairing person today is the Heather Melville, Dr. Heather Melville, OBE. So Heather celebrates the 40 career in the city, having established a purpose, values-driven reputation, together with a gentle, focused yet persuasive style that's known for helping both individuals and businesses to be successful. Heather Melville is newly appointed the role as a director and the head of client experience for the PwC UK. She is leading the dynamic team of data scientists, established marketers, and the client feedback specialist. Heather is one of the inspirational and leaders in supporting the development of the BAME talent. From the early school right through to the first role they may have secured in the corporate workplace. So Heather delivered a series of Black-led thought leadership forums with the support of the group CEO to address the lack of Black talent being pulled through into leadership roles. So with that, I would like to hand over to Heather, who is going to chair today's session. And this was Kayala Ilazawar from PwC. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Have I got a treat for you today? My name is Heather Melville, and I will be chairing the panel today. What I have to say before we start is, if we had said 12 months ago we would have a dive-in festival that was virtually, we would all laugh. And the numbers that have been shared with me today in terms of how many people have participated is overwhelming, but it just shows there is such a need for this conversation. I'm joined today by a distinguished panel of leaders, and I'll start with Pamela Thompson-Hall, and she's the Managing Director and International Head of CIMA and Head of CRB CIMA, Willis Towers Watson. Sabine van der Linden, CEO of Alchemy Crew. Alex Belletti, UK Insurance Leader at PwC. And Trevor Gandhi, Senior and DI Consultant at Markel. So we have got a treat for you this afternoon. Keep those questions coming, and we're going to try our best to answer as many of them as we can. What I'd like to do actually is just get each of the speakers to just take 1 minute to introduce what they actually do. So we'll start with you, Pamela.
Thanks very much, Heather. And first, let me say I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this extraordinary event, as you say, remotely, extraordinary in itself. I run a diverse group of countries in Central Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa on behalf of Willis Towers Watson. I have specific responsibility for our corporate risk and broking business. I've been in the industry for about 25 years. I also chair our International Inclusion and Diversity Council, and I sit on our Global I&D Council. in connection with our work, combining between Willis Towers Watson and Aon, I'm also really privileged to be co-sponsoring the integration planning work stream that looks at culture and change. So super relevant for me to be part of this process and hear what everyone has to say.
Thank you very much. And if we could move over to Sabine, please.
Certainly. Hi, everyone. Really pleased to be here. Thank you very much, Heather, for having me here, as well as the Dive-In Festival. So I'm a CEO and Managing Director of Alchemy Crew, which is really a firm which works with young ventures. And our goal is to enable large businesses and large insurers to improve the way they actually welcome young ventures in their environment. Most people know me for the work I did with Startup Bootcamp InsurTech and Harvard InsurTech Hub, where I work with over 30 insurers globally and accelerated over 70 startups and enabled them to deliver over 300 POCs, proof of concept, with those organizations over 5 years. I've worked with a lot of diverse people, so my team have always been people from all around the globe, covering all different ethnicity, genders, and various areas of diversity.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Heather. A very good question. What do I actually do? I think I'm sure my other half would ask me that. My children as well. So I'm a partner in PwC. I've been running, I have a number of roles actually. I'm a lead relationship partner for insurance companies. I've run a global network over the past 4 years actually in relation to a new accounting standard. So that's taking in 85 territories and 2,500 people at last count. And now I am PwC's UK insurance leader. Diversity and inclusion is, to me, very important. This is only the second time, interestingly, I've spoken publicly on this topic, which I think says something in itself. And I think in this role, in the insurance industry for PwC, I want us to fully embrace this topic. So I'm really pleased to be here.
Thank you very much, Alex. And over to you, Trevor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Trevor Gandy, D&I consultant. Currently partnering with the Markel team, the global leadership team, as well as colleagues, to craft a diversity and inclusion strategy that really positions the company to be a differentiator in the market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, as ways of working have shifted dramatically with COVID-19 pandemic, many office workers had to transition to new work duties, processes, and modes of communication and collaboration. Research shows that having a foundation of involvement, fairness, respect and equality can help employees adapt to new ways of working and interacting. As we face a future of vastly different working models, and that was obviously enhanced yesterday, and team structures, building such an integrated culture now will only benefit organisations in the future. To gain some insight into what organisations are faced with and how leaders can respond, we've invited business leaders to discuss. I'd like to start with you, Pamela, and my question really is, working from home became a norm during the last few months. How did it impact you and your colleagues? A rather long question. The lockdown did not affect everybody equally, especially from a gender perspective. We also know people who lost their jobs as a result are struggling with mental health issues. So actually, let's kind of look at working from home and the blurring of personal lives, whole thing about work-life balance and all of that, those great big topics for us to open up this session with.
Yeah, it's a great start. Thank you. It has been a change curve of a year, I have to say, for me, for my colleagues around the world, actually, not just in this, I'm based in London, so not just in one of our larger offices in London. And it hit us very surprisingly out of the blue. And so we spent a lot of time at first focusing on our operational capabilities. Could we get people home to work from home? Did they have the right setup? And a lot of attention was put on that. And we realized very quickly that really the focus needs to be on how people are feeling it on the ground. Are they able to work? Are they living in what we discovered were multi-generational families, having to work off the side of a kitchen table with kids around their ankles? Have they got carer responsibilities that are either existing or became present as a result of actually COVID impacting our colleague family around the world? And do they have the courage to be participating remotely in the activities that were going ahead? How do they make themselves visible? So we had a number of challenges for our colleagues and challenges for ourselves, I have to say personally. I was privileged enough to have a 2x2 office, which I'm standing in now, to move into. But then I had kids at my ankles, literally school remote working, a husband working off the kitchen table. We had the same sort of worries as everyone else, and yet I look at myself and think I've been really privileged because I'm still in work. We've had colleagues whose partners have lost work, whose families have become out of work. They've started to take on responsibilities they hadn't envisaged and at a pace. And so we've managed operationally, but actually looking at the mental well-being of our colleagues has become a priority. And in fact, that's what we say, their health and safety is a priority now in all we do. And sustaining the workplace for them so that we are able to continue to pay them. So we have looked at pivoting how we're spending our money so that we can continue to pay the salaries. And that's required an enormous amount of work behind the scenes and an enormous challenge for leaders who are used to a very traditional way of in the office managing. So I would say a change curve of a year, definitely. We've created environments where colleagues can break out together in virtual coffee rooms. We've created focus groups to talk about how it is that we might be doing it better, what issues they're struggling with. We've learned about people with children at home. Toddler children in particular has been a struggle for people where you've got two working parents in the house. And it's been really humbling, I have to say. I know we're talking really about leadership in this session. It's been really humbling as a leader to learn how our colleagues have managed to cope nonetheless, and keep us going. And we have kept going. So it's been an incredible story of resilience also.
Thank you. We will pick up on that word resilience a bit later on when we go to the Q&A session. Trevor, my question to you now is, what changes have you noticed from the employer's perspective? We can't forget about the increased role of technology and the role it plays in terms of communication. What are your observations on this?
Yeah, similar to what Pamela said, we realized that we needed to make very quick pivots in terms of how we were staying connected with employees and conducting business virtually. One of the things that I think that Pamela emphasized was very important. We needed to really understand some of the individual challenges and be mindful and flexible, because whether it's an individual that has both children or parents or others are trying to take care of at the same time they're working, or those who may be alone, we really needed to be empathetic to individual situations. In addition to the virtual meetings and like WebEx and other tools we were using, we found that beyond the traditional business sessions, it was very important to think about ways to have team networking. So at Markel, that was team networking sessions, virtual happy hours, but also we were still at the same time hiring individuals. So we had to think about hiring practices virtually, and beyond identifying people for jobs, really onboarding this new talent so they were part of the Markel family as well. On the wellness front, we knew we needed to be very thoughtful in terms of the resources that we were providing our employees. And so we partnered with Headspace, and we offered free subscriptions for all. And this turned out to be very useful in terms of providing these types of wellness tools and resources for employees. And in turn, they were able to use some of these tools with their families as well. Our employee resource groups, while they had plans for, I think, a certain set of activities as the year began, quickly turned the corner to help us deliver what was needed in the moment due to the pandemic. For Mental Health Awareness Month, our employee resource groups held sessions They leveraged our employee assistance program, but on a larger scale, to really destigmatize mental health and wellness, we worked with some external professionals to host a session as well. So thinking holistically about how we can position our employees to perform well, both, for the employer, but also in their personal lives, was top of mind.
Wow, thank you. So I think we all have to acknowledge during this pandemic, it's not been plain sailing. Even the best organisations are challenged by the current situation. None of us knew on the 1st of January that by the middle of February, we would be in the situation we're in now. I'd like to really go over to you, Sabine, just for you to share the impact this has had on your firm and how you managed to support your leaders and all of those difficult, challenging ways of working, how you've actually brought them to the forefront in a positive way.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because when the crisis started, we were used to, when you look at the way we work with the insurance company I work with, partners, we tend to work in a room, right? We brainstorm, we workshop on walls. And without walls, we had to think through how do we bring the innovation value we were actually so used to and took for granted to do in a room by getting everybody together. So we had to actually think through how to use new tools. And one thing which is fascinating is how much the remote working platforms and collaborations have grown during the past few months. As an investor, I have to look at platforms, technology, and whether insurtech is growing or fintech is growing. Whilst fintech and insurtech actually will plateau this year or decrease, I can assure you that COVID-19 remote platforms are going to increase by at least 4 billion more than the number was last year, so estimated to 25 billion. And the platforms we actually tend to see increasing, for sure, the platform we are using today to communicate, but also remote working platform, which allows us to do whiteboarding, which allows us to connect things together and actually work with our clients much more effectively. So what we have used is seen as an increased use of digital tools. We are using them every day now. We also have had to embed in our everyday work a platform where we just chat. We are used to WhatsApp, but you have other platforms which allows you to communicate every day in unique ways and share content as well. We had to, like Trevor mentioned, implement our virtual coffee hours. So we have the tools we use allows us to be randomly selected to have a coffee with members of our teams all around the globe on a weekly basis. So we don't know who we are going to talk to, but at least we have that coffee chat, the one we used to have in the office, and also, the drink hours where we don't have slides and any content. We just come together to talk about family and allow issues to be shared. Those are extremely important activities for us. One thing we learn we need to be careful of, though, is that some people will work harder and longer hours if they are not seen. And so we needed to make sure that everybody felt that we trusted them in the work they were doing. And we also had to find ways to limit communication silos.
I have a very tiny supplementary question, which I know the audience will want to know because it's so significant at the moment. Our processes in terms of hiring people, recruiting and onboarding people were not really built for them to be done in this virtual way. I'm really intrigued to know how have you been able to continue that process? And I will open it up to the rest of the panel a bit later on.
As a mini influencer in InsurTech, I'm very fortunate in the sense that I'm getting, people reach out to me all the time. And the key thing is I take the time to talk to people, even people, who may not fit the profile in first place. I just take the 30 minutes a day just to have the chat And I've met amazing people through that process. Just LinkedIn as a base, just to have the coffee chat. And that actually become a way for me to identify talent, even though I may not need them today. I just keep in touch because they become my talent of tomorrow. There are actually interesting tools which allows you to connect through social media to actually identify those talents. And actually, I think everybody should get used to putting, some mini jobs profiles out there just to see how this platform works, just to actually start engaging with people and just being honest that it may take 6 months to get them into the team, because that allows you to see what is available out there. Yes, everything is digital either, and we've learned from it to use social as a means to identify talent.
Thank you. This question's for you again, Trevor. So sorry to have you on the hot. Alex, I will be coming to you soon, but I think it all kind of fills in with what we're talking about. I think, Trevor, I really want to understand what other cultural challenges do you think employers are experiencing right now? We can't forget the tragic events that have happened during COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter and the US and how have you managed that? How have organizations managing that?
Wow, great question. And I think some would term this potentially the second pandemic we've had to face this year. But to provide some insights on what occurred at Markel, I'd say first, given the racial injustice we all witnessed and resulting global civil unrest, Markel's leadership team knew that they needed to reach out to colleagues to talk about it. That was the first step. Given the Markel culture, silence on this was not an option. We knew that these tragic events affected all of our employees deeply and in very significant ways. Our two co-CEOs, Richie Witt and Tom Gaynor, hosted 2 town halls. One was solely dedicated to discussing diversity and inclusion, to learn about the experiences and perspectives of some of our employees on race and unconscious bias. These were new discussions to certainly be having with colleagues. In addition to being peers, though, with our employees in what I would call the virtual listening and talking table, our co-CEOs wanted to provide a safe environment to address these tough issues. It was an emotional discussion, and the CEOs, as well as all of us, were committed to listening and ensuring that we keep the lines open for candid dialogue. We have a global diversity and inclusion steering committee at Markel, and they've really then had to pivot as well to put in place a set of strategic options and directions to inform our employees and to think about operational decisions that really could once again allow us to emphasize what our value proposition is to our employees during this difficult time. We continue to host forums where employees could share stories to further cultivate a trusted environment where all feel safe and supported. These sessions have evolved, though, to gather more insights, learnings, and perspectives from our non-Black employees. While informing and sharing from courageous Black colleagues is essential, gaining an understanding from our white and other non-Black colleagues as to what's occurring in their families, in their social networks, what steps they're taking to advocate for change has been critical. That exchange, I believe, has really been a differentiator at Markel, to bring everybody to the table to discuss not only what's occurred, but then what behaviors and actions can, one, progress our company, but what can we do potentially to help transform the larger society. As leaders, we feel we need to continue to challenge ourselves to step outside of our comfort zones. And it's critical to continue to build and strengthen relationships with our employees to promote change.
Thank you. Before I go over to Alex and the big corporate question which is coming, Pamela, I just really wanted to hear from you. How did your employees feel about the whole thing of Black Lives Matter, and what things did you do in terms of communicating with them?
It's been a really emotional process. And I feel ill-equipped actually to share the breadth of work and detail that we have uncovered and work that we've been through. But we did exactly what Markel did. We felt we had a need to talk about it with our colleagues in our what we call our inclusion network. So our multicultural networks first to guide us on how to have the conversations, how to create a safe space to have them. And we've had those conversations. They've been guided by, in particular in GB, colleague of mine, NetSite, they have been emotional, raw, painful, revelatory. We've discovered things we didn't understand or know, and we've created actions around those discoveries to make our environment a better place, make it a place where people feel they can express these views and share with us their experiences in a way that they weren't able to do so before. So what I would say is it is a journey for us, and it's been an incredible experience that we've had, an awakening, and been able to actually take some positive steps as a result of the tragic circumstances that we've witnessed across the pond. We've done the same in the US. We've done a lot more in the US, but similar exploration, talking, safe spaces, and then action on the back of it. It's been led by our CEO. So it's been led top down, and I think that's super important. It's been led by him top down globally, and by the CEOs in each of the countries, so GB, North America, etc. We've all been actively participating in it and just empowering colleagues to have the discussions. So it's been an eye-opener.
Thank you very much. Alex, over to you. Amid the crisis, companies have learned to have to work in very different ways. We ourselves in PwC have had to adapt almost overnight. This could have led to a conclusion that strategies and business models need to be adapted to changing times. So what do you think is the silver bullet that's come out of all of this? And how have you seen leaders, particularly in the insurance business, deal with this, react to this, and adapt to the new ways of working?
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, Heather. The big corporate question. It's, in fact, just before I come on to the big corporate question, I guess two very brief comments. One on Sabine. You know, we've got, I think it's over 1,200 people joined us as our new grads last week. So I think it is possible to hire and recruit in these times. A challenge we have, though, is how do you embed the PwC culture in 1,200 people when they're not in the office and they're not learning and seeing, and I think that's a challenge for a number of entities. And Trevor, interestingly, you know, I mentioned this was my second conversation on the broader D&I topic formally. The first one, interestingly, was in a client setting where we talked about Black Lives Matter in a really just open question. You know, there were people of color around the table, and what did it mean, and what did it mean to us, and what were our organizations doing? Certainly not in my comfort zone, but wow, what a great conversation and a real eye-opener for a number of us around the table. So I guess long may those conversations continue. From I guess a corporate perspective, you know, companies have learned to work in different ways and work more effectively. Interesting, one of the things we're struggling with at the moment is coming back to work a little. Where our technology is a lot easier if everyone's at home because Google works or Zoom works. It's not really set up for half of us being in the office, socially distanced at different ends of a table. But no, definitely, I think business models have to be adapted. A number of my clients have got call centers. Wow, so the people in call centers are now at home. Fantastic, you know, working off a laptop or working in their bedroom. So, you know, I think there does have to be, there is some silver lining. But in terms of some of the lessons that we've learned, I guess, from an operating or leadership perspective, number one, I wrote down here, it's not easy, actually, to show leadership at this time. And today is a perfect case in point. I mean, I don't know about the people listening, but, you know, we had our guidance last night from our Prime Minister, which wasn't 100% clear, and we had guidance from firms that, you know, do you come into the office, do you stay at home, what's right, what's wrong? Do people feel pressure? You know, and I think as leaders to be able to create, you know, a safe and inclusive environment where people do what feels comfortable to them but also recognize the needs of a business is a real tightrope, and one that leaders do need to show proper leadership on. I guess the second point is demonstrating compassionate leadership. I mean, one of the partners I look after has young children and a husband that works, and she's full-time as well. And she's a partner. And trying to manage all of that with kids that are off school or home working is really, really difficult. And trying to, I guess, flex your mindset that many people that you interact with, clients or employees, etc., have those challenges, and being open to that, I think does give us the opportunity to be better leaders or more inclusive leaders at the end of, touchwood, at the end of the crisis. One thing I did just want to talk about in terms of business practices, specifically around the D&I agenda, and I talked to, in anticipation of today's panel, I talked to a number of people about this, and the consensus to some extent was that inclusion could be easier in a virtual world. I know that sounds strange, but you know, the loudest voice doesn't necessarily win over if you're on a Zoom call. And it does enable you to put your hand up virtually. I mean, sometimes it does, obviously, but you have a mute button. You can mute people if you're in charge of the call. But that was one as well. I think another comment that was made to me was visual differences between people are less prevalent. Whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's height, whatever, are less prevalent in a virtual world. And so the bias or the unconscious bias that making it may be less prevalent. So, I mean, it's all open for debate. I'll be interested in questions on this, but those are a couple of points that were made to me, a couple of my views, and Heather, hopefully I've answered your question.
You certainly have. Thank you. I think going on to what we heard last night, it's quite clear that we are living through a period of extraordinary uncertainty. It changes by the day, sometimes by the hour. Our physical safety, our economic security and daily conditions in which we'll be operating for the next 6, 12, 18 months or longer. Business leaders are confronting challenges on an individual level. They are also responsible for supporting a wide cross-section of people, all of whom have their own range of experiences, emotions and resources for responding, and many who are paying a psychological toll that is still poorly understood. What can leaders do to seize the moment to effect more impactful and sustainable changes? I'd really like to change the style now and bring it to a place where I'm going to answer these questions out to all of you, and just a very quick answer, just so that we've got time for the Q's and A's later on. So changing leadership styles, we know that leaders need to be different. You've just touched on that, Alex. What would you say is one of the biggest differences that we've had to adapt to?
I think inviting people into your homes, actually, is, you know, I came to the office today. It's the second time in 7 months or 6 months I've been to the office. You know, you put your suit on and you put your armor on and you come in. It's very different to waking up, sitting behind your desk and inviting 20 colleagues into your study or into your kitchen. And I think that creates a different dynamic, actually. So to me, that's the biggest.
Thank you. So then, Trevor, this one I think I'd like to point to you. How do we ensure that marginalised groups are visible? I think Alex mentioned some of that earlier on, but I think this is so key, because you'll have a quiet person that sits there and doesn't want to ask a question. How do we bring them into the conversation so they're part of that?
Yeah, I'd say, you know, to start with my response, I'd say, you know, this is certainly a time when an organization's commitment to its employees comes into light, you know, very clearly and very transparently. Levels of trust and empathy required, you know, it's not something you can create in the moment with a press release or a statement to employees. So I'd say at Markel, what I've been impressed by is that they have a set of guiding principles and cultural values they call the Markel style. What's been useful for us this year, though, is to think about how to put that style in action and they've identified like 5 key areas. And so it's been interesting to think about that as a way to make sure our leaders are positioned to be leaders, not managers, during this time of unique challenges. But as you say, Heather, that our employees feel connected, and I'd say the level of sharing and what is shared now about what may be challenges or what your team, your company needs to know is altogether different than it was, prior to 2020. I think, as Alex said, I think we often have felt there was this separation between the personal life and in our professional endeavors. But it's certainly connected. I think it always was. But now that empathy and leaders really role modeling is critical.
Thank you. I've certainly found it very interesting looking at the books, the selection of books many of my colleagues have on their shelves strategically placed when we're having a call. And I think that is quite amazing because you learn a lot about what individuals are about through that. And also, if you watch the people on television, I'm always looking at what's their background like. And I think that's something that we never envisaged we'd ever see, but has happened. So the other question I want to bring to you, Sabine, is we've talked about leaders having to change. How do we develop compassionate leaders? I think we've seen examples of young children running behind the scene of our clients and of our colleagues, husbands walking across, bringing tea in or bringing food in. How do we cope with that as a professional services or as a bank or a law firm, which, it's usually those meetings take place in a very structured and formal boardroom?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think Trevor and Alex highlighted 2 keywords: empathy. So empathetic leaders, adaptive leaders. I think what you are going to see is a lot more authenticity coming out of people, and them welcoming you in your home even before you start a meeting. Some of you have seen me with no makeup, right? And so it's what happened, right? It's real being through. And what I've seen is actually a lot of people like that. A lot of the insurers I'm working with like the fact they can see me for real, actually, every day, and we can actually whiteboard, on those platforms and just be true to oneself. So I think what it's bringing is that trust in the individual. I think that care and that ability to want to adapt the way, and inspiring as well, inspiring that actually it's okay to be normal, to actually have another layer that no one needs to hide. And I think that actually has played very well in our projects, in the fact that we can also shout at each other when we are not happy. What I see is we're working very differently now. Right, we need to adapt, and to echo Alex, to design, for example, a new business model. When you have to do it on, a whiteboarding tool online, it's hard, and so it's about that ability to testing and learning, and actually learning a lot from the startup, because a lot of startups, when they actually started their businesses, they were pretty much working virtual, and I see a lot of businesses, large businesses, learning from that test and learn approach that come from the startup environment.
So a little question for my distinguished panel, just to bring things into the real world. Put a show of hands, please. How many people have had to learn where the camera is to switch it off as part of COVID-19? We didn't all need it before, right? Through and through. How many people, and this is an interesting one, I did it today, how many people have been talking eloquently into the screen and not realising their mute button's on? So we have learned so much through this whole pandemic, I can't tell you. But I think one of the things that we need to think about as we move towards the future is communication has been key.
Yes.
And being able to speak to people, realizing that you're in their eyesight, okay? So it's not easy to be sidelining somebody by sending them a text message separately or doing Hangout, because guess what? We might not see your hands, but we can see your eyes. And that then tells the person or the persons on the call that actually you're not really listening to them. So I think we need to think about that going back into the real world whenever this happens. When we're in a meeting, we have to be in that meeting. The phones cannot be the sidetrack. Nothing is more important than the people that you're speaking to at the beginning. So I think we need to think about right here and now, D&I, the inclusion word, has been used and talked about across the world, across various industries, every single company's talking about it. I think there's the biggest drive for inclusion leaders that we will ever see in this century. How do we keep that D&I momentum going? I think I'm going to put that one over to you, Alex, to start with.
It's a really good question. I think it feels like the D&I agenda is starting to become part of mainstream business, actually. And if people or organizations don't grasp this, then their employees and their customers may go elsewhere. I don't know what you think, Heather. It just feels like, you know, over the past 5 years, the momentum has built, and now, yeah, it feels like it's part of mainstream.
I think I'd like to add to that by saying that our clients from the C-suite have been reaching out to us across all industries and saying to us, please, would you help us with this problem? How can we be better at it? So I think for me that says two things. It means that as corporate organizations or any kind of organization, we've got to live to a certain standard because the outside looking in have held us up in high esteem. So I think that's a real key thing for us. The other thing that I'm seeing is that our employees will remember the experience of how we included them, how we dealt with the whole Black Lives Matter, how we dealt with families during COVID-19, because that is a key piece. I know for us within PwC, it felt like it was just we've moved from an office to another office. And what was lovely was to see people having conversations with their children during a meeting saying, look, I'm really sorry, mummy's on a call right now, but I'll come back to you right in a minute. And we're all accepting of it. If that had happened 7 or 8 months ago, we would have been absolutely floored by that. How could that happen? So I think that is really important. And I think the thing for me now is, how can we make sure that intersectionality remains in the workplace here and right now? And how do we as leaders create a more inclusive workplace? I'm going to reach out to Pamela to answer that one first, but each of you, I'd like 2 minutes from you.
Okay, great. I think there are two things I would say in response to that. The first is the commercial imperative behind having an inclusive and diverse workforce. We know the stats, we know the research about better results amongst competitors where they have diverse and inclusive workforces. It drives innovation and better results. We're coming out of a crisis, probably going into a type of recession. We need every lever we can pull to keep that momentum going for business and to help it grow and sustain itself. So I think for the unbelievers or non-believers or naysayers, as I call them, there is a commercial imperative. On the flip side, for leaders, what should they do? I think we are coming into the age of servant leaders, thank God, of leaders who will have to embrace and make their teams successful, who will have to include them and develop them, who will want to be doing that, because without that drive from leadership to role model inclusive behaviours and ensure that the talent is along the journey with us, we won't be able to deliver those results. So I think there is something beautiful about what's happening as well. There's a need and there's an opportunity, and those that weren't skilled before the lockdown, before the crisis, in demonstrating inclusivity and behaviours that we need going forward have had to do it. And so we need to encourage them to continue to do that for the future of all of us.
Okay, I'm going to change this a little bit because I can see there are some very good questions coming in. Kalia, can I ask you to just read a couple of them and perhaps I'll ask members of the panel to answer them?
Sure, there are really some good questions to all the members of the panel. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can.
Great. So the first question is, leading remotely is challenging, engaging, training, speaking to people remotely is difficult. Can the panel share any experience or insight to breaking down the barriers from reduced face-to-face and increasing open comms online?
I think, Sabine, would you like to address that one?
Yeah, sure. So I think like anything, it's probably need to be planned. So when you start looking at a training and then considering any interaction, there need to be some level of communication and some level of planning so that you can go into potential training. What we've seen is you have to use all the cues. So it's not just going into a virtual room and say, okay, let's get trained now. It's about also preparing. So before the training, preparing content, maybe organizing some calls to actually customize people with what they are going to learn before going into a training environment. What we've seen is using some of the digital tools which are not just a Zoom environment or a webinar environment is very important. People need to play. They need to have post-its. They need to have things to learn from. So leveraging remote collaboration tools become extremely important to allow those interactions to work. So there will be some planning before, things to be done during, and then some leave behind like we do usually in normal trainings.
Thank you. Claire, did you have another question that perhaps we could this time give to Alex?
Sure. So the question is, what's the panel's thoughts on blind hiring, and do you think this could shape the future of recruitment?
So that could be Alex or Pamela, actually.
I think Pamela more than Alex, personally.
I will give the next section to Alex.
Okay, Pamela,
Can you read the question again? Blind hiring?
Yes. What's the panel's thoughts on blind hiring, and do you think this could shape the future of recruitment?
Right. Checking out the names.
Well, so we do blind hiring already, and we've determined that yes, it is really important to. Can I say homogenise CVs? I don't know if that's the right word, but to take out the triggers for biases. And we think it's just a really important tool in terms of our hiring process. We also do it for other things as well when we're looking at promotion stats and activity. So does it have a place? Absolutely. Does it have a future? I'm certain. Yes. It's not easy to do, and it's not foolproof either. But it's certainly it's one of the levers we need to deploy to give people equity in a process of recruitment.
Great. Thank you, Pamela. If you allow me one more question.
Can I just add a quick comment to that, actually? And the reason I didn't comment was I didn't quite understand the terminology. But no, absolutely. And I think blind hiring is very, very important. And interestingly, I did one of these tests this week in advance of a D&I session we have at our partner meeting, which we have a standing agenda item every month. And the one where you look at names and you press the keys and it detects unconscious bias. And it's interesting, my stats are better now than they were a year ago, but still not completely neutral. So I do think blind hiring and blind promotion, I think is really important.
Thank you. Can we take one last question, Kalia?
Yes, this one I believe to Alex Bertolotti because he has been personally involved in this. Where do you start with establishing an allies program? And I guess it can be male ally or just a general allyship program.
I think it's a really cool question, actually, and it's one that Carla, obviously, you and I started talking about in my new role. And the reason I think it's a cool question is because somebody like me, who's getting on in age and white middle-aged chap, something, a role to play in developing the D&I agenda. Because sometimes you feel a little bit outside, you want to help, but you don't quite know what. And so I quite like this concept of allies. So, we can be in this together. Not the clearest answer, but hopefully you understand what I mean.
No, we do. Thank you.
One point I would add to that is for companies that have employee resource groups or other networks, think about open membership as well. There's an opportunity to have these allies and advocates with the existing construct you have. And so I would just encourage whatever you form to date, be sure that you have everybody at the table to listen, learn, be informed, and share back, what they can do to help progress.
And, that's such a good point for us to almost end on. I say almost because, first of all, I think employee resource groups are one of the most undervalued groups of people in organizations. They help take them on a journey. They help build out the value proposition internally. But we are seeing more and more, particularly even in PwC, we're seeing our clients are reaching out to how can they connect in with our employee resource groups, which I think is such a powerful thing. So all good conversations must come to an end, and we could keep going all day. So I would like to end with one word from each of you around what this whole leadership and diversity means to you, or what's the one thing you're going to do different. I'll start with Trevor. One word that comes to mind.
Go back to listen.
One word.
Listen.
Listen. Pamela?
Pivot.
One word, please.
Pivot.
So I can hear that.
You can't hear me.
No.
1 second.
Okay. While we're sorting that out, shall we go over to you, Alex? One word?
Talk. In brackets, even if you get it wrong.
Thank you. And Pamela?
Pivot.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And I am going to end by saying my one word. It's really about empowering. Well, actually, it's two words. It's empowering and it's engaging people to be the best that they can be. I cheated, but I wanted to make sure that we...
Mine would have been opportunity.
Aha, thank you. Opportunity. So I'm hoping that each of us have left this session today having learned from each other, but most importantly, shown to our audience the power of inclusion within business, transformation, change, which we've all had to be a part of, and how well we can work remotely when we have to. And without further ado, I'd like to say a huge thank you to the panel for your time, for your honest and open answers, and for inspiring our audience. Thank you very much.